Welcome to UN Insider. I'm Elaine Reyes at the United Nations headquarters in New York. Join us as we delve into the world's most pressing issues and learn how the people inside work toward a better future for everyone around the world.
Coming up on UN Insider.
If nothing is done, we fear widespread famine in Gaza is almost inevitable.
A dire warning about the humanitarian situation unfolding in Gaza.
We might not be saving these people from bullets, but we are saving them from the flood.
Conflict coupled with flooding has compounded the need in South Sudan. A look at the work being done by UN peacekeepers. And a conversation on protecting indigenous cultures as the UN prepares to host a forum on the rights of indigenous peoples. Next.
The conflict in the Middle East and the widespread fallout remain top priorities for diplomats here at the United Nations.
Security Council members on Tuesday heard of the devastating humanitarian situation unfolding in Gaza. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, or OCHA, the Food and Agriculture Organization and the World Food Programme have told the Council that the people of Gaza are experiencing catastrophic levels of conflict-induced food insecurity and are at high risk of famine. The organizations say that the risk is increasing by the day.
At this stage, very little will be possible while hostilities continue and while there is a risk that they will spread into the overcrowded areas of south of Gaza. We therefore reiterate our call for a ceasefire. If nothing is done, we fear widespread famine in Gaza is almost inevitable.
The WFP in its report said that Gaza is seeing the worst level of child malnutrition anywhere in the world, with 1 child in every 6 under the age of 2 acutely malnourished.
Conditions in northern Gaza are particularly dire. On Sunday, February 18, we resumed deliveries to the north for the first time in 3 weeks. Our intention was to send 10 trucks per day for 7 days to address immediate needs and provide some reassurance to people living there that sufficient food would be brought in. However, on both February 18 and 19, our convoys faced significant obstacles. There were delays at checkpoints, they faced gunfire and other violence, food was looted along the way, and at their destination, they were overwhelmed by desperately hungry people.
Tuesday's meeting comes after OCHA sent Council members a letter earlier this month sounding the alarm on their dire food insecurity in the Gaza Strip. They've called for immediate action to enable a huge increase in the volume of food and other humanitarian supplies going into Gaza. Council members have voiced grave concern over the risk of famine, calling on Israel to adhere to international humanitarian law and not use starvation as a means of war.
An immediate ceasefire is a necessary prerequisite to protect civilians, carry out rescue, and alleviate the humanitarian disaster. This is currently the overwhelming call of the international community and the overwhelming consensus among Council members. We hope that certain countries will adopt a responsible and constructive attitude and support the Security Council in taking action to demand an immediate ceasefire in Gaza.
Israel says it's not holding up the humanitarian aid into Gaza. The Israelis say they are doing all they can to care for civilians, even going over and beyond what is expected.
Israel has been clear in its policies. There is absolutely no limit, and I repeat, there is no limit to the amount of humanitarian aid that can be sent to the civilian population of Gaza. And Israel continues to coordinate the transfer of aid in accordance with humanitarian organizations' requests and the operational conditions in the field. Since the beginning of 2024, the majority of aid requests were approved. 83% of coordinated movements to facilitate aid were approved.
There were again calls for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire by many Council members, especially those who voted in favor of the previous Security Council resolution, who warned that if the conflict continues, many more lives will be lost. Jody Jacobs, CGTN, New York.
The humanitarian crisis in Gaza is among the issues topping the agenda. as the UN's top human rights body meets in Geneva, Switzerland. Secretary General Antonio Guterres and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi delivered remarks during the opening session.
Rafah is the core of the humanitarian aid operation, and UNRWA is the backbone of that effort. An all-out Israeli offensive on the city would not only be terrifying for more than 1 million Palestinian civilians sheltering there, it would put the final nail in the coffin of our aid programs. I repeat my call for a humanitarian ceasefire and the immediate and unconditional release of all hostages.
As a responsible country, China plays an active part in global human rights governance. We have contributed efforts to the conclusion of a series of important international conventions and declarations on human rights. The vision of building a community with a shared future for mankind represents a shared aspiration of people of all countries. It also injects strong impetus into human rights protection worldwide.
Xu Deja is monitoring developments inside the halls of the UN. Deja.
Yes, Elaine. First, you will notice that I wear a sweater. Not only me, but many, also including the spokesperson of the Secretary General, started to wear scarf, vest to keep warm. Why? Because now the United Nations is facing a serious cash flow issue. The Secretary General promised UN staff not to cut their salary, so you have to save money from some other places, including air conditioning.
2 weeks ago, you said that the financial status of the UN is not that good. How would the financial status affect UN's ability of dealing with all those things?
The Secretary General has done his utmost to ensure that despite the financial challenges that we face, that our basic work remains, right? And so the fact that we have lowered the temperature in this building in the winter is a way to save money without impacting our work.
Now the situation in Gaza still dominates this week's press agenda here in the UN. Again, when answering reporter questions, permanent observer Mansour of Palestine State told us the Arab countries will submit a draft resolution concerning the admission of the state of Palestine to the United Nations.
We will be, refining that strategy for moving into the Security Council with a draft resolution calling for the admission of the State of Palestine to membership. Before we go to the Security Council with a draft resolution for admission, we will announce the number of countries that are endorsing and supporting this effort.
As the death toll in Gaza reaches 30,000, the Security Council had a meeting on the humanitarian situation in Gaza. UN briefers from WFP, FAO, and OCHA obviously pointed out the dire reality in Gaza Strip, especially in northern Gaza. But the most dramatic moment happened when the U.S. Deputy Representative Robert Wood and Russian Representative Vasily Nebenzia clashed over Gaza and Ukraine. Nebenzia pointed out that the U.S. had blocked numerous UN efforts to establish a ceasefire that could have averted widespread starvation in Gaza.
By blocking international efforts to stop violence in Gaza, Washington bears full responsibility for the unprecedented number of civilian victims of this escalation. Their number is now near 30,000, and that is the cost of the American veto in the Security Council on Gaza.
And this comment started the clash. Two ambassadors went on back and forth for several rounds.
The Russian Federation is a country that doesn't contribute to resolving humanitarian crises. It creates them. Just look at Ukraine.
Comparing the scale of it is impossible. And second of all, who should be lecturing us about that? The country who destroyed Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and carpet-bombed in barbaric way those countries. Yugoslavia also is on the list.
Are you saying that Russia is not conducting any bombings of Ukraine?
Until this moment.
I propose that we stop here and we continue our sparring during the meeting on Ukraine.
With this kind of conversation in Security Council open meeting, how much unity do you expect in the Council? Well, next month, Japan will become the president of the Security Council, and let's see what difference the new president can make. And that's all from me. Elaine.
Shudija, thanks. South Sudan has seen large numbers of displaced people in the last year, largely due to conflict. In one area, peacekeepers are working to protect hundreds of thousands of displaced people from another threat: pervasive flooding.
This is the Bentiu area in South Sudan's Unity State. In the last 3 years, it has been engulfed by floods and has virtually become an island. Persistent rains and flooding have led to a massive crisis. United Nations peacekeepers have found ways to protect the waters from completely submerging the area, which hosts about 300,000 refugees fleeing conflict, as well as those displaced by natural disasters.
We might not be saving these people from bullets, but we are saving them from the floods.
The peacekeepers build mud walls and dikes to keep water at bay. The floods that began in 2021 have submerged about 5,400 square kilometers so far, consuming homes, schools, infrastructure, and even farmlands, and reducing residents to refugees reliant on relief aid.
Behind us is the IDP camp and the UNMISS camp, and all around this area is 5 to 6 feet of water. But you see, just in front of you is a thin road which is connecting this, I would call, an island with the outside world.
This road and a mud airstrip are the only infrastructure available that allows people to move around the area and aid to come in. A Pakistani military engineering task force works round the clock to ensure the systems stay operational.
As an engineering unit, we are maintaining main supply route, we are maintaining dikes, maintaining the airstrip. We are using our machinery extensively, but still the dikes are sometimes deteriorated, and we have to even rush late at night or any time.
Moving around our dike system, which is now more than 80 kilometers of the dike system, which is protecting this Bentiu town, we just move around and see physically with our own eyes if there are some weak points that we need to cater for. If we did not have this dike system around us, then the place where we are standing at this moment, it would be in 5 to 6 feet of water. There would be no IDP camp, there would be no Bentiu town, and there would be no UNMISS presence here in Sector Unity, especially in Bentiu, if this dike system was not available.
The United Nations says the heavy rains and flooding are the worst in 60 years, blaming it on climate change. The situation is exacerbated by unrest within South Sudan and neighboring Sudan. As the Pakistani task force is battling to control nature from destroying Bentiu further, the fate of these refugees hang in the balance. Wanjamungai, CGTN.
Coming up.
We are trying to find the ways to live together because we have only one planet.
UN Insider.
Indigenous people account for just over 6% of the global population. There are an estimated 476 million indigenous people spread across 90 countries. There are more than 5,000 distinct groups that may identify as indigenous people. In April, UN headquarters will host a new session of the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. Since 2002, the forum has met yearly to discuss indigenous issues related to everything from economic development and education to health and culture. I sat down with Miriam Mazakiza. She is a senior social affairs officer at the United Nations and has worked on indigenous issues for nearly 20 years. She's also a Quechua from the Salasaca indigenous group in Ecuador. Marian, thank you so much for joining us. What are some of the biggest and most urgent issues for indigenous people around the world?
It's different from region to region, country to country, even between communities. But most of the issues that we have here at the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues are land issues, territories, natural resources. People are dying because some states and companies are taking away their lands and territories. Unfortunately, they don't have the proper access to services, especially education, health. Those are not culturally appropriated. And recently, very sadly, they are migrating not only to the cities, but to different countries. Indigenous peoples also are frequently killed sometimes. They are persecuted because they are defending their territories. So that's also very, very unfortunate. For indigenous women, for example, also is very sad to see that because of these national companies are going into their territories, many issues like violence against indigenous women, trafficking, also are affecting most of them.
You mentioned migration. We're seeing more and more urban indigenous. Can you tell us a little bit about their move into cities and the specific challenges they face?
I think number one would be, as any individual, they would like to have, economic income, but this is related to the lack of opportunities in their own countries. So that's number one, that is, pushing them out of their lands and territories. And once they are in these big cities, they confront the discrimination, marginalizations. They are living not around the services that usually there are in the cities, but also they confront the loss of their languages.
One of the biggest issues of our time, of course, is climate change. What has been the impact of climate change on indigenous communities, especially those with a lot of natural resources?
Indigenous peoples, they count around 476 million in some 90 countries. And they take care of around 80% of the most diverse places in the world. But they still protecting, they are, keeping all the environment as it is. And we can see a climate crisis that is not only affecting indigenous peoples, but also the entire humanity. And they didn't contribute to that. So in this case, because they depend so much on their lands, territories, they are suffering more and more. Because when these companies enter into their homes, they are pushed away, and they don't have a place where to go.
One of the other big issues is the issue of mining, logging, and exploration in some of these lands. Has there been any progress on that front from governments and leaders in those areas?
So I would bring an example that it was really interesting. The issue of the Uyuni Salt Lake, which is now in consideration for the lithium batteries for different issues. And it was very interesting to hear that indigenous peoples from that part of the world, Potosi especially, they come together through their own decision. They organize themselves and they prepare a draft proposal to become a law. and they were asking, that as they are the owners of that particular land, they also should be part of this company, if we would say. They even decided how much of the percentage they need to earn, because they want to use that for their own development. We would say development with identity.
When you look across your work at the UN over the years and as a Quechua woman, what do you hope to accomplish and what are your goals for indigenous peoples?
When I came to the United Nations, my hope was, of course, to learn what specifically this big institution was doing for indigenous peoples, but also for the humanity, and especially how we are trying to find the ways to live together, because we have only one planet. I am very glad that at the United Nations, many milestones has been achieved by indigenous peoples. Number one is the adoption of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in 2007. The second one, I would say, is the outcome document of the World Conference on Indigenous Peoples. And of course, because of that also, there was an emergency of indigenous languages. So in 2016, we had an expert group meeting that led member states to think about an international year of indigenous languages. And now we are in a decade of indigenous languages. So those, I would say, huge decisions adopted by the General Assembly show that at international level, indigenous peoples became a key actor.
Marian Masakisa, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Water covers most of our planet, but in many places, finding suitable drinking water is a growing challenge. More than 2 billion people live in water-stressed countries. UN agencies are trying to help communities find solutions.
Ivan Gonzalez makes the daily walk to check if there is any water. These are the magical landscapes of La Guajira, northern Colombia, along the border with Venezuela. These deserts are home to the Wayuu, Colombia's largest indigenous population. The world is waking up to the fact that fresh water is a limited resource.
Más de 100 familias dependen de esta fuente de agua.
The Wayuu dig highways, traditional pits that collect rain and so provide water to drink, cook, and bathe.
La última vez que vine para acá y logré abastecerme de agua hace como 4 a 5 meses, porque no ha habido lluvia.
When there is no rain, the community uses a reservoir filled with water that is dirty, that they believe is making them sick. And no rains means no crops, which in turn has caused mass hunger and starvation across the region. The government has declared a state of emergency. We traveled through these lawless deserts to see how the lack of water was impacting people here. We start in the community of Los Cocos. Here, the little water that is in the natural wells is kept under lock and key, as if it was gold.
Los pozos ahorita mismo, eso está en zona de extinción. Así mismo, que se están secando. No nos da para el sustento diario, tanto como para los animales y para el consumo humano.
Residents here report worsening water quality closer to the sea due to high salinity, resulting in brackish water. Animal waste has contaminated other sources of water.
Y lo otro que el agua ha tenido dificultad para consumirla.
UNICEF and other foundations are helping establish new sources of fresh water for communities across the region.
Se están beneficiando 3.200 personas. Anteriormente la situación era muy fea. Salía el agua con un olor muy putrefacto, un olor muy fuerte como olor a alcantarillado. Sentía el olor a unos kilómetros.
Part of this mission is to educate people into how to conserve water better.
Coming up.
Nowadays, sea level rise is becoming more scary than tsunami itself.
UN Insider.
Introducing CGTN Now. Find award-winning documentaries and exclusive content from around the world. Latin America like you've never seen. Breakthrough films shining a light on important stories. In-depth discussions with fascinating people. Giving you new perspective on topics that matter. You also get live, round-the-clock international news and headlines, and so much more. Original content from CGTN's Global Bureau. Download the CGTN Now app and find the global perspective you've been missing. Available on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire. Or go to cgtnnow.com on your tablet or mobile device. CGTN Now. See the difference.
The impacts of climate change can be seen around the world. But for small islands and developing countries, the impact is often magnified. Greg Navarro shows us how people in a small nation north of Australia are coping.
Elkanah Capelli says he's often reminded of how lucky he is to have the Pacific Ocean as his backyard.
Everybody say if you're close to the ocean, that's a $1 million view.
But lately, he hasn't felt so lucky.
During high tides, actually, the water comes up all the way to here.
Tidal surges are eating away at the land that's been at his family for more than 6 decades, and they're becoming more frequent, the most recent just 2 months ago. This used to be the edge of the property with a beautiful view of the ocean, but that last tidal surge literally took about 8 or 9 meters of land, enough to wipe it out in one single go, further exposing the house behind us. And there's nothing he can do to stop it.
It's just a matter of minutes and stuff. It can just be taken away by the ocean. That's scary.
The impacts from climate change are taking a dangerous toll across the Pacific. For the island nation of Nauru, rising sea level is consuming the coast where most of its 12,000 residents live. Just weeks ago, a tidal surge breached the seawall and washed over this road, claiming about 4 meters of land.
Nowadays, sea level rise is becoming more scary than tsunami itself, because we're actually seeing the impact of it.
The other major climate change-related impact is more frequent droughts, depleting Nauru's precious freshwater supplies.
We've had some intense droughts in the last few years, and of course the people struggle, and then the country struggle.
Nauru's government has created a plan to build houses on higher ground in the country's heavily mined interior, but that project and addressing water issues here requires money, which Nauru does not have enough of after depleting phosphate reserves which served as its main income source.
All new infrastructures and all new development comes back to funding. And definitely Nauru at the moment with our economic stance, it's not really stable.
For now, Elkanah Capelli is focused on trying to save his property.
This is my future, this is my son's land.
A future, he says, that continues to slip away. Greg Navarro, CGTN, Nauru.
I'm Elaine Reyes at UN headquarters in New York. Thanks for being a UN Insider.